Some of you probably saw these cinematic F1 2026 opening titles that I made. What started as a small passion project somehow ended up blowing up across the F1 community with hundreds of thousands of views, reposts everywhere, and fans arguing about everything from Piastri's villain arc to Norris sitting on the throne. This whole thing took about 2 months to make, and in this video I want to do a breakdown of how I did it. From where the idea came from, how I built the tracks and animated the cars, how the shots were designed, and how the final look was achieved with compositing. And if you enjoy this kind of stuff like project breakdowns, Blender workflows, VFX stuff, make sure you hit the subscribe button because I'd love to make more stuff like this. So let's get into it. So I started gathering some references, mostly from F1 social media because they just had, it's the main source. And I was mainly looking at their new posts about the 2026 cars. And also trying to get a feel for where they are going with their own looks and maybe trying to copy that. But I also had a bunch of other references, and especially from videos, stuff like, Ash Torp's Haste Corp Group C, that one is really good video. Foothark Studios, F1 projects, especially the Aramco one for Esports World Cup, and stuff like my friend Ivan's Mercedes ad, from which I sort of copied a few of the shots. And obviously later when the Red Bull livery video dropped, that one was just simply lovely. I find it really important to have really inspiring examples from which you can draw from, and it also helps to set you in the right mood for the project itself. Before we go too deep in the video, I just want to give a shout out to Davide Aroldi, who did the sound design. I think he did a really good job, and I know that if I was doing it myself, I would spend 2 weeks doing some half-assed job, so definitely give him some love as well. Just to quickly touch on the assets, I found most of the models on CG Trader. There is this one guy who had all the drivers in their uniforms. I also found these satellite scans of real tracks like Hungaroring, Monza and Spa. They worked really well as a base for the actual terrain and the road. But I also needed some extra assets like curbs, fences and some other stuff. And this is when I found out Track Tools by Mesh House. I'll explain later how I used it, but it's basically a bunch of Blender geometry node modifiers for building racetracks for Assetto Corsa. And another really useful Blender add-on was launch control for car animation, and I'll also talk more about it later. Before I had a fully realized idea, I was setting up some scenes just to see what kind of look I wanted to go for. So I first did this shot of Lando, and I probably spent way too much time on it, replacing the 4 with number 1 on his back, but it was actually a solid starting point. And I quickly settled on this red volumetric fog background, and I'd say it feels pretty close to the official F1 stuff like they did in the 2025 opening titles. I also did the Cadillac shot. This was pretty much copied from my friend Ivan's Mercedes ad, but I really like this idea with a spotlight in shape of their logo being revealed over the car. And I also did recreate the Audi livery and made this shot just to see how the background would hold up in a car shot. And I also did a quick comp setup in After Effects, which honestly ended up staying pretty much the same throughout the whole project. So I have a bit of a unique way of coming up with visuals for my projects. I usually start with a song that I really like, and just as I listen to it, I try to visualize the shots. It's a bit hard to explain, but I just took Hans Zimmer's F1 theme song and kept listening it on repeat, and just trying to imagine how each shot would look like. And it also hypes me up for the project itself because I'm already imagining the end goal before I even properly started the project. But it also isn't a really straightforward process. For example, I first thought about doing a unique moment for each of the drivers, but having 22 drivers, it proved to be a lot, and we also have some rookies. So instead of that, I went with more of a connected story, sort of. I still had those key moments Cadillac reveal, Hajar on a bull, Stroll spinning, obviously. But for other shots, I just went with really cool, just regular racing shots. And at that point, I just, opened up Premiere, put the song in and started going bit by bit and laying down the shots. Just simple text layers describing the shots quickly, and even using a couple of images and references so that I myself can remember what exactly I meant with each shot. And that was the rough layout that I played for like 50 times on repeat because I was so hyped up watching it, because I kept imagining the final version, when in reality I had like a list of 40 shots in 3D that I needed to create. But luckily I structured the shots so they are all parts of certain scenes, so I only had to change camera angles for the most part. So now it was time to basically fire up Blender and get to work. I'll quickly go over the technical part and then later about the creative part of how I made these shots. I basically went shot by shot, and at first mainly focused on the environment and animation. And then later I would go back and do the final look and lighting. As I mentioned, I used the track tools, and this really had almost everything I needed for building out the tracks. The satellite tracks that I bought had a curve object for the road, and I would just apply a set of modifiers that create the road mesh and snap it to the terrain. It also had a setup for curbs, which was another set of curves that I placed around corners, and it would also make them snap to the road mesh automatically. And for the fence, it was again a stack of modifiers on two curves that follow the road, and the only thing I did was I modeled the floodlights. For animation, it was all done with launch control add-on. It automatically rigs the vehicle in one click, and then it's all about just setting up the driving path and adjusting the speed of the vehicle. It's honestly that simple. I first set like just randomly 200 kilometers an hour, thinking it would be fine, but later when I did a render, it actually felt slow, and it kind of makes sense. You know, F1 cars are speeding at almost 330 kilometers an hour. So that was quite a difference. And I even almost ran out of a straight on a part of Hungaroring because the animation would finish before the shots. For lighting and overall look, it was mainly a big box with a volume shader and big strong red lights in the distance. But one key thing that I did was I would switch up the lighting depending on the camera angle. And you can see this in real movies as well. Your brain might ignore it, but it's just to make each shot look as pretty as possible. And now how I actually went around creating these shots. I personally like natural camera movement. And what do I mean by that? Even though I work in 3D, I like when the camera feels like it's on an actual set, like it's a physical camera, you know? There isn't some like crazy movement that's unrealistic. It feels grounded and it feels realistic, and I think it also makes it more cinematic. And just look at the F1 movie. They have follow cars, drone shots, mounted cameras, and they even used real broadcast shots in some cases. And I pretty much did the same thing for my project. For example, this shot from Spa, that's a real camera angle I accidentally found on YouTube, and as soon as I saw it, I just knew I had to recreate it. And then the third shot is basically a similar angle to the race broadcast. Then this shot for Alonso part, it's actually Alonso versus Hamilton fight in Hungary from 2021. I start with what is basically the same broadcast angle, and then I did a POV instead of top camera, and later switched up to a mounted shot on the part where they touch. But it was also about other moments that fans like to talk about, and showing those as well, like Russell's steep pose, will he do it again? Piastri finishing third, maybe that had like some sort of effect on him, maybe he's going for a villain arc. Norris sitting on the throne, defending champion, and others are racing at him. Or Stroll spinning, like, come on, that's the key shot in the entire video. So after finishing up the 3D in Blender, I rendered out all the shots and moved on to After Effects. So like I said, the comp setup stayed the same, and it's actually quite simple. It's just a bunch of effects to emulate real camera and imperfections. Every time you do 3D renders, they will always turn out absolutely perfect, perfect sharpness and everything. But in real life, that's not how cameras work. You always have stuff like chromatic aberration, halation on the highlights, vignetting, and personally, I also added a film emulation plugin that adds realistic film grain. And for drivers and slower shots, it was a bit more work. I added some smoke and particles just to give it a bit more of an atmospheric look. At that point, I had like a final version essentially, but something was missing. It wasn't bad, but it felt a bit flat. So I sent it to my friend Ivan for some feedback, and one of his suggestions was that I needed some lens flares. And that honestly felt like the missing ingredient. Not just as some overlays, but also to some shots I went back and added like an actual lens flare in the distance that would act like the sun was there. And it really feels like it made the shots way more cinematic. Especially the shot where they are all racing to the trophy. As the camera turns around and you have the pop of lens flare, and then the flare itself is in the distance with a subtle flicker, and the lens elements are shaking from the camera shake. I just love that. It's really important to have some people around you that can give you some feedback. You can just be stuck in your own head and not have any idea what to add or what's missing. And it's also easier when you have multiple heads just to like brainstorm ideas. And I think in this case with the lens flares, it really went from that like from 80% all the way to 100% for that finished look. So I remember the day I was going to post it. I honestly had zero expectations, and I was first going to try the F1, the official F1 subreddit, but I couldn't, I needed a mod approval because I had like zero comment karma, so I almost gave up at that point. Then my friend suggested to try Formula Dank, which is like a meme formula subreddit. And I just like came up with some funny title and posted it. I honestly didn't expect much. And then all of a sudden it just like completely blew up. And that was honestly the best part of the whole experience, you spend 2 months working on a project purely as a fan, you don't even expect anything in return, and it actually pays off in the end. And shout out to my dude Ponden, who found this video somehow when it had like 100 views on YouTube. He did a react video and it went super viral on TikTok. And I think it really helped to push the video as well. So thank you so much, dude. So yeah, that's the full breakdown how I did the F1 opening titles. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, make sure you leave a like. And also, if you enjoy this type of breakdown videos, make sure you subscribe, because I definitely want to make more of these. Also, let me know in the comments which part is your favorite and why is it stroll spinning.